Hi there, and welcome. My name is Daniel Nastase, and I'm the author of the LangChain for JavaScript Developers book. This is my interview with Jacob Lee, the main maintainer of LangChain.js and founding engineer of the LangChain company. In this talk, we go through topics such as what is LangChain and how can it help us? What is a good learning path for getting started with LangChain? How the products from the LangChain ecosystem, LangSmith, LangGraph, LangChain itself work together, and much more. In the notes of this video, you'll find all the links mentioned during the talk. Thank you, and I hope you like it. Let's get to it. Hi, Jacob, and thanks a lot for this interview. Maybe we can start by telling us a bit about yourself, like a very brief introduction.
Sounds good. I'm excited to be here, Daniel. My name is Jacob. I'm the lead maintainer for LangChain.js and love building with LLMs.
Super. And speaking about LLMs, I'm curious. How was the first time you interacted with LLM? What got you interested in LLMs?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had my own startup working in basic cloud computing for the last probably 6 years-ish before joining LangChain. And I ended up in a situation where I was figuring out my next move, wasn't sure what I wanted to do next. And I was fortunate enough to find some contract work for a startup who wanted to build something with LLMs. And at the time, I think ChatGPT had just come out. It was sort of magical, right? It was like, oh, it's this amazing thing that can answer any question. And I was able to, there's some mystery at the time, though, around best practices on how to build it, like what is the actual mechanics, how does it work even? I think a lot of things that are now maybe a bit more clear to the general sort of developer population were at that time a bit more opaque. And I ended up using a very early version of LangChain.js for this contract. And I ended up really enjoying it, loved the experience of getting started, and kind of as someone who had no experience with it, working with LLMs or anything in AI, really, LangChain.js really opened up like that door for me. So of course I really decided, this is kind of what I want to do and what I want to work on, and started contributing myself. And ultimately, ended up joining full time.
Super nice. And speaking about LangChain, how would you describe LangChain to someone who doesn't has any clue what LangChain is? How would you describe it to, I don't know, like a medium JavaScript developer, like someone who has a bit of experience but doesn't know too much about LLMs and this whole landscape?
Mhm. Yeah, I would say the very simple high-level explanation, we're a framework that helps you build with LLMs. Now, it's a new programming model, non-deterministic, sort of some interesting considerations around streaming because calls can take a long time. And, I think as everyone saw with kind of the early days of OpenAI, providers can go down under heavy load, and there's like GPU shortages and things to worry about. So LangChain and LangChain.js really tackle a lot of these best practices and kind of little things you'll discover when you start working with LLMs. And we've sort of built a lot of things in the framework that make them much more pleasant to work with.
Okay. And also, from a beginner perspective, what would be a good learning path for someone who wants to get started with LangChain? What concepts they should start with, and is like there a specific order in which they should tackle things?
Yeah, so on our docs page, we have various tutorials. I think a very simple one is just type a prompt into a model, right? That's like kind of your simple one. And I think that's a very intuitive one as well. You can see, call different methods like stream. I think all the kind of chatbots you see, ChatGPT, Claude AI, all the kind of bespoke ones have some form of streaming because, again, calls can take, I think as sort of traditional developers using traditional APIs, you'll be a little bit stressed out if your call is taking more than 500 milliseconds, let's say. Whereas for an LLM, it's very common for a call to take, let's say, 10 seconds. And the streaming UX is very powerful and very kind of magical for folks who are building sort of these front-end experiences for end users. And, you can build your own chatbot. That's like fun. You can share it with your family and friends. We have some nice templates and tutorials for kind of like front ends that go along with it. Plenty out there. And I think, one sort of area where I see a lot of, and we see a lot of LLMs getting put into production is under retrieval augmented generation, or RAG,
Mhm.
which is basically this process of, you've built a chatbot. Now you want it to access some kind of personal data or be able to answer questions outside of its training data. LLMs are powerful, but they don't have every token yet. So um, RAG is one of those fields where it's kind of useful for a broad swath of use case organizations and users, and good practices have started to emerge. So I think that's a pretty solid. If you've never worked with LLMs or LangChain before, you kind of just get started with getting familiar with a few of the concepts and models and prompts and output parsers and things like that, and then work up to like a simple RAG use case.
Super. Indeed. Super nice. Uh, would you recommend to someone first to start, I don't know, to pick up a model, Claude or ChatGPT, and interact directly with its API, and only after that move to LangChain? Or it is also okay to start directly with LangChain, given the fact that it knows how to interact with all of these models? How would you approach if you would start from scratch now?
Yeah, I can talk about my own experience, I guess. I started with just LangChain.js directly. I,
Yeah.
don't, ended up trying the client directly as well, just for, I think it was in a bit of a newer state back then. Both libraries were, but OpenAI's was a little bit more raw than it is currently. I think now it's, there have been some big improvements there around a lot of the sort of UX and sort of common patterns developers want to build with. So I would say either one. And with LangChain, we have tried to make it like as light a wrapper as we can over the OpenAI SDK. We do throw in some bells and whistles around retries and like some nicer experiences in various cases. And of course, it'll integrate well with the rest of the LangChain ecosystem. So yeah, I would say pretty agnostic there.
Okay, okay. Well, for me, this is something that I liked about LangChain, the fact that it also provides you a learning model. So it teaches you how to interact with all of these models, and you can do this directly in a structured way. So you don't have to pick up a bit of information from here, a bit of information from here. In general, if you know LangChain, it's okay to do your job with, I don't know, 80% of the models out there. So yeah. And
Yeah,
speaking
we've tried
about
to
the, please, please.
we tried to reduce the magic around like just the pure chat model wrappers and things like that, and make the abstraction and concept itself relatively map well one to one with the underlying client when we can.
And you mentioned earlier you said the LangChain ecosystem, and I know that you guys have a couple of products in this ecosystem. So there is LangChain itself. After that, you have LangSmith, LangServe, LangGraph. There are already like at least four elements in this
All the
ecosystem.
lanes, yeah.
Can you? Yeah, exactly. Can you please tell us a bit how these elements interact and how they work together? And in what order they should be approached by a newcomer?
Sure thing. So I think we've intended LangChain itself, and as LangChain, started a year ago, to be sort of this like nice entry point to general tasks with LLMs. And then as you sort of advance in your journey, I think one thing that's really excited people recently and sort of was one of my first, wow, this is amazing technology moments, was working with agents and this concept that
Mhm.
LLMs can not only parse and make sense of lots of unstructured data, but they can also make decisions and sort of decide on code execution and like flow. And then LangGraph is kind of the agent framework we've built. And we've taken a lot of the learnings we have um, gathered from community members and folks who use the framework. And sort of like that's our next generation of these agents, which can basically empower the LLM to make decisions about code execution. I think it's one thing that really got me excited about LLMs in general. And LangGraph is sort of our newest and sort of like most customizable way to build these complex agent flows. And LangSmith, I think, is as people have built with these LLMs, there have been like sort of unique challenges that have come up with sort of debugging and like tracing, and it's hard to say it's harder anyway to write unit tests for an LLM because they're non-deterministic.
Mhm.
So
Good.
one way you can do that is through evaluation and sort of having some kind of data set and like basically checking to make sure your LLM is an app is like constantly outputting good responses. So we built LangSmith as like an accompanying platform around the rest of the open source.
Okay. So LangSmith, would it be safe to say that LangSmith is like the testing framework for LangChain?
I would say so, yeah. I think, have been calling it like productionization. So, you build a prototype, it's flashy, it's cool. Now, how do you know if it's working? How do you know if I can put it in front of a user? How do I debug failures? That's kind of where LangSmith comes in.
Okay. Because I know just I think 2 weeks ago or 1 month, something like that, was released that talk with like what we have learned from building 1 year with LLMs was quite a big talk. And I think a big part of this talk was around evals and how do you
Mhm.
evaluate and how do you know that you didn't add any changes that actually broke some other stuff. So exactly, evals are more and more important in this context. Super.
It's a funny,
And
funny
but
situation,
please.
yeah. Oh, it's a funny situation. I had a colleague who likes to say, I think hard things are easy with LLMs, which is, taking just like a ton of unstructured, like, you have to structure outputs. It can kind of make sense of anything, really. But then you have easy things that are not very hard because they're non-deterministic, and running the same thing many times can have different answers in many cases. So I think a lot of what guides us with what we built is like trying to provide, good software practices and like sort of structure around this randomness and this non-determinism
Correct.
that this new kind of model of writing software presents,
Correct.
if that
Correct.
makes
Correct.
sense.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. Definitely. Uh, and I have one question because where does LangServe fits in this whole ecosystem? What does it do, LangServe, and how does it links to all of the other components?
Sure. So I think one other challenge with deploying LLMs is deployment. So you've built something cool locally. Now you want it to be like accessible and live to users with kind of again, I think the streaming UX has been like a big shift. I think a lot of developers would not have worked with streams very often, or certainly not in like their kind of day to day as a central UX for like a front end app. So LangServe was or is our like one solution we have for basically taking a chain you built, like a series of calls with some other maybe steps in between, and presenting it to like a front end in a way that a user can interact with. So there's a playground. There's like different ways to um, different endpoints that like we present for things like streaming, batching, and vote, like just general kind of response or full responses. And then you get like a docs page too, so you can see
Okay.
all the endpoints and like play with them in that page.
Oh, nice. By the way, as a fun fact, streaming was actually what got me into LangChain. I was listening to
Mm.
I don't know if you know the Latent Space podcast, the
Yeah,
one
yeah,
made
with
by Swift.
Swix.
Exactly. And he mentioned initially I tried when I first find out about I tried to build my own models, which was don't try to do that. I was actually trying to understand them and train them from scratch, and my brain imploded. But after that, I was listening to the Latent Space podcast, and I heard about streaming, and I said, "Oh, okay, this is something simple enough that I may try to actually understand." And from streaming, I got to LangChain, and after that, the whole the whole ramification started to appear. So yeah, streaming was something that brought me to LangChain. Um, LangChain.js is made in TypeScript. And for someone who, I don't know, likes more vanilla JavaScript, let's say, uh, are they missing out on too much? Or is it feasible to use LangChain.js without TypeScript? Just a preamble question, but I'm curious about this. Do you think that someone who is using LangChain.js without TypeScript, are they missing a lot? Are they, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the age old question, and I think DHH David Hannemeyer Hansen had like a pretty viral blog post recently where he came out pretty strongly against it, and then you have folks who are like, really, I can't build anything without types. Like it's going to be not buggy and not very robust. And I think with us, we've tried to have first class TypeScript support from day one, and have the best kind of do the best we can to make sure for the people who do really want that kind of guidance and that typing, we have a good solution and it does what you expect. But at the end of the day, it is, compiles down to JavaScript. You're totally welcome to use it without, if you prefer.
Okay, super. Um, what current or upcoming LangChain feature are you most excited about these days?
Yeah, we recently announced a product called LangGraph Cloud, which is basically I mentioned LangServe earlier. That's more for general apps. With LangGraph, though, I think there are even more considerations around building agents. They take the non-determinism up to 10, right? Because now you have the agent
Right.
deciding which next step to take instead of just parsing out some data. So to address some of these challenges, LangGraph includes things like checkpointing and really easy support for human in the loop. So you can basically say, if you have a customer support bot, for example, you don't want to just throwing refunds out. Maybe you want to
Correct.
have like a manager authorize a refund before the agent can give it. So I think deployment around this stuff has been a bit trickier than even than normal. And I think we've built some really cool things to provide good solutions for like managing these flows and sort of presenting a good sort of quick interface for debugging as well. So you can go and take a agent's flow and like go into individual steps, rewind to a previous step that maybe went faulty, update the prompt, and then redeploy, update your app from there. So I think that's been pretty exciting and pretty popular for the Python community, and I'm really excited for that to come to JS.
Yes, sounds very futuristic, very science fiction. You have a fantastic GitHub repo about how to build a Next.js application with that integrates LangChain. What other learning resources or GitHub repos would you recommend for someone who wants to get started with LangChain.js? If something pops up into your mind.
Yeah, sure thing. So we have tried to make our docs, I'd say like, the tutorials is, a nice resource for folks getting started. I think, like I said earlier, you can just start with the very simple, how does a chat model work? How do I put a prompt into it? How do I deal with the output? And then kind of move up from there to something like RAG, or, if you want to go into building with agents right away, you can do that too. There's also an excellent course I did with Andrew Ng
Mhm.
on
Right.
deeplearning.ai, which kind of walks through a lot of those simple, like conceptual to like a fully functioning app. And then the fine folks at the Scrimba have this like very nice interactive tutorial that they've worked on. It's, I think, using LangChain. Uh, some of the imports it's a bit older, so some of the imports are maybe a little bit different from the newer versions of LangChain, but the content itself is pretty evergreen, I would say. And one of
Yeah.
the nice things about them is that you can go and take some. It's like you have a code editor and then like a screencast walkthrough, and as you play the lesson, code will generate, and that'll run through like some examples there. But you can actually pause the lesson at any point and update the code yourself and rerun it. So kind of gives this nice like interactive twist on learning, which I think is really powerful.
Yeah, indeed. The Scrimba tutorial I also I think, was one of the first resources I've used in
Ah,
order
cool,
to get
nice.
familiar. Yes, it was super nice. It was super nice. And a final question, and this is a question I got from a newsletter subscriber. I've asked them if they want to send you any questions, and someone replied. In your opinion, what makes a good software engineer, and how do you become one with years?
Yeah, I think software in general is only been around for what, maybe, I guess if you go way back to the 50s and early computers, or
Yeah,
probably less. The field itself is less than a few decades old. It's only a few decades old, right? And since that time, it's been changing enormously, like from whatever vacuum tubes to C to JavaScript to browsers and the web, mobile, whatever. I think the most important thing is just stay flexible and stay learning. I think LLMs are a new paradigm that people have to get used to, but it won't be the last kind of. I think how could it be the last big shift, right?
correct.
So I think the most important thing is just to kind of keep that kind of enthusiasm and love for learning and like being mentally flexible and like mentally elastic enough to embrace and like try out new paradigms and judge for yourself what is useful and like what kind of presents new and powerful experiences for new products.
Correct, correct. And I would add to this, do stuff. Always do stuff,
Do
code
stuff,
stuff, and
yes.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I will link your Twitter account because I know you are active over there. But besides Twitter, is there somewhere else where would you recommend that someone follows you or
No, mostly just Twitter. I try to sort of tweet about LangChain.js and sort of things we're up to there. Try to be as active as I can. That's a great place to stay in the loop.
super, super. Jacob, thanks a lot for your time and keep up the good work. I mean, you do a fantastic job in LangChain. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel.